The very first time I heard the term PlayStation, it was attached to a CD-ROM add-on that Sony was doing for the Super Nintendo. Despite that project being in the oven for years, Nintendo was unhappy with the idea of giving Sony so much control over the new platform and jettisoned the deal right as it was to be officially announced. Sony would not be deterred, however. They continued development of the PlayStation as a standalone device, launching the final product in Japan at the end of 1994. During that time, I was completely focused on Sega's 32-bit Saturn. Because the cost of importing was so high, I didn't even consider importing the PlayStation. It wouldn't be until the console's North American launch in September of 1995 that I finally got my hands on one. And boy, the hype around that launch was huge. Sony put out a massive ad campaign to make sure you knew that their new console was available. It worked because nearly all of my friends wanted one. In what seemed like an instant, Sega's new Saturn had been pushed aside and completely forgotten overnight. Believe it or not, that's been 30 years ago now, and that prompted me to go back, take a look at the launch of the North American PlayStation, and rate every single game that was available. I am using my typical 5-star system that is easy to understand and follow. I don't pull any punches here. Was the PlayStation launch as good as history dictates? Or was it loaded with so-so games that were way overhyped? Let's find out. There are those out there that will tell you that games like Toshinden or Ridge Racer were the best games on the PlayStation at launch. I'm not one of them. Air Combat was easily my most played game and takes the crown as my pick for the best gaming experience in those early days. The mission variety was awesome, and I loved how you could go anywhere in the play area. There were well over a dozen aircraft you could fly, and the flight team provided constant chatter and warnings over the radio. The gameplay has an easy arcade-style pick-up-and-play appeal that even non-flight sim fans can enjoy. It was developed by Namco as a follow-up to their popular arcade game of the same name, and I don't feel it gets nearly the amount of love it deserves as launch software. The only area it really needed improvement in were the visuals, but even then I thought the planes and enemy ships looked fantastic. I easily give this classic 4 out of 5 stars on sheer fun factor and replayability.
Enemy locked on target. Fire! Shoot him down! Stay with him. Don't let him get away. Get away. Mission accomplished.
Battle Arena Toshinden is actually quite difficult to grade. On one hand, it's very easy to play, using a mostly Street Fighter style moveset that should be very familiar to even fight game newbies. It also looked really nice at a time when textured map 3-dimensional fighting games were not exactly the norm. These elements should have won many a fan back then, which no doubt explains its extremely high ratings among both professional and amateur reviewers. The thing is, as a fighting game fan, I noticed much more than that. The gameplay was slow and the pace was plodding at the best of times. The AI was both incredibly cheap and incredibly stupid at the same time. I also hated the dodge, which in a game with projectile attacks rendered them mostly pointless, particularly in multiplayer. Compared to the playability of any decent 2-dimensional fighting game, it felt terrible to me. I also thought Virtua Fighter offered a far superior gameplay model for a 3D fighter. That leaves me in a place of recognizing why it was popular versus my own distaste for what it represented. I'll stay in the middle and give it 3 stars as a result.
Sonic!
ESPN Extreme Games was easily one of the biggest surprises of the North American launch. It was developed by Sony's internal team that would eventually become their sports developer, 989 Studios. This one focused on street racing using a number of different sports like cycling, skateboarding, rollerblading, and even the street luge. It also contained a bit of combat with the contestants being able to hit one another during the race. The graphics engine was exceptionally smooth and it featured multiplayer support. It was so well received it spawned a number of sequels and went on to become one of the platform's best-selling early releases. I really can't recommend it enough, both for its playability and its unique appeal. It was damn near road rash for a new generation. For that, it earns 4 stars easily and is one of the PlayStation's best launch games. Kileak, the DNA imperative, had a number of problems working against it. First, the name is just about as bad as names can get, prompting no one to give it a second look. Then there was the gameplay and level design, which was boring, lacked replayability, and didn't have the enemies or combat to help offset that. It left us with a game that was stunningly similar to a few other first-person shooters at the time, like Robotica, which itself suffered many of the same traits. It's not the worst game by any means, but I still can't give it more than 2 stars, especially with the PlayStation Doom only a few months away.
Repair parts secured. Repair parts secured.
NBA Jam Tournament Edition is always a good game no matter the platform. That core gameplay is so well done that you would have to go out of your way to break it. And this actually turned out really well on the old PlayStation. The color, detail, scaling player, sound, music, and presentation mimic the arcade closely, resulting in an experience well worth taking, especially if you enjoy multiplayer. It's a noticeable and solid improvement over the 16-bit editions, and remains one of the best ways to play it on a home console all these years later. It gets 4 stars with only a touch of franchise fatigue holding it back.
Heating up! Excuse me! To burn effect! To balloon! Oh! Nothing but magic!
The PlayStation received Power Serve 3D Tennis at launch courtesy of Ocean. I wasn't a fan of this because I thought everything looked so unnatural. The physics of the ball looked wonky, the crowd looked terrible, it was so close, and the presentation lacked any energy or pizzazz. It all felt so vanilla and uninspired. Gameplay-wise, it wasn't the worst tennis game I ever played, so that keeps it away from the dreaded 1-star status. Still, I can't ignore the lack of any real reason to play this when the other launch games were so much better. I give it 2 stars, which I feel is more than fair. The Rayman project was a standout release on the PlayStation at launch. It takes both Rayman and Rayman 2 and attempts to bring them home fully intact from their arcade origins. That had been pretty easy for a game like the first Rayman because it had been around for so long. I had already seen a number of home conversions. Rayman 2 on the other hand had not, and it had lots more animation and special effects to consider. Overall, you can't fault the conversions. They look and play as they should, a package old school shoot 'em up fans should appreciate. Of course, this is also at a time when 3-dimensional polygons were really starting to take off. Anyone looking for something to show off what the PlayStation could do in 3D, you won't find it here. Still, these games hold up well and are still very playable. 3 stars for anyone who enjoys the genre. Another two-dimensional game that showed up on the PlayStation at launch was Rayman, a platformer with some beautiful visuals. This was the first real indicator that the console had some impressive abilities when it came to two-dimensional sprites and backgrounds. The color, layering, and performance all screamed 32-bit, and something you never could have done at the same level on the 16-bit consoles. It also played fairly well. Though the mechanics were slow and heavy, it was responsive, and you received numerous abilities as you got deeper into the game. But as easy as it would be to slap a 5-star rating on this just because it was so highly regarded at the time, I feel there is one thing holding it back from greatness. That's the ridiculous difficulty it has. Get past the first few stages and you are quickly left with a game that is merciless in its challenge. Get a bit further, and it goes from merciless to just plain cheap and unfair. I really do feel this holds this game back a bit, and I question just how far the people that rated so high actually got before they bowed out. There are sections of this game so reliant on pinpoint timing and knowledge of when and where to jump, it borders on sadistic. It most certainly isn't for the casual fans out there. Still, it was a memorable experience for its visuals, great opening stages, and whimsical presentation. It earns a solid 4 stars but could have been higher with improved pacing and a late game that was a touch less difficult. Ridge Racer got its start as an arcade game developed by Namco. When it came home to the PlayStation, it was truly amazing how close it was visually and in terms of gameplay. So similar, in fact, that it was used as a driving point by the media of the day for why Sony's new console would be a force to be reckoned with in the coming generation. There is no question that Ridge Racer was a well-done arcade conversion. The models, the track, the gameplay, the sound, it all comes together perfectly. The only thing that really sucked here was there was only one track in the entire game, with a few different routes to take around it, and it ran at 30 frames per second, or half the arcade's original frame rate. Still, my friends and I dumped many an hour into it trying to beat the Devil and Angel cars, soaking up the drift-heavy gameplay and loving every minute of it. It was no Daytona USA in terms of fun factor, but it was still a killer representation of what was possible on the PlayStation even in those early days. It earns 4 stars and is without a doubt one of the reasons that the platform had such a strong start. I don't know how many times I've seen a rating list for PlayStation launch games and seen Street Fighter the movie in last place. I've never understood it because this is far from the worst of that lot. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot holding this one back from greatness. The digitized visuals are funky, the animation borders on comical at times, and just like the film, many of these fighters look nothing like their original counterparts. But for all it does wrong, the one area that holds up surprisingly well is the gameplay. Taking after Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, the majority of what you'll find here mimics that game very closely. There are some timing and combo variations, but if you could do it in Super Turbo, you can likely do it here. Even the same super combos are in place. The overall appeal of this is likely to boil down to how the film landed with you. If you can't stand that, then this will have a hard time being anything more than a bad memory. I found some fun with it briefly, and I have no problem giving it 3 stars.
Round 2, fight!
First kick.
Hadouken! Attractive Hadouken! Shoryuken! Shizuru Hadouken! You win! Perfect!
Old Total Eclipse Turbo here landed on the PlayStation over a week before the official launch. It was strange to see a PlayStation game for sale before the actual hardware was available. It was a shrewd move and likely sold a few more units than it otherwise would have, just based on excitement alone. But even back then, I couldn't shake the fact that Total Eclipse Turbo felt like an old hat. When it first appeared on the 3DO over a year and a half earlier, it was something to see thanks to its visuals and simple mechanics. By the time it was available on the PlayStation, it faced heightened expectations, and it just didn't hold up. It's far too simple to be anything more than a moment's curiosity, even with the mild improvement in performance. If you turned the visuals flat and played it as a 2D shoot-'em-up, it would be more akin to the stuff made in the early 80s as opposed to the genre greats of the 1990s. I give it 2 stars, but this is easily one of the weakest games on this list. Despite covering and rating all these games today, I didn't have much interest in the PlayStation initially. I was all about the Saturn, loving Sega's arcade hits, and home creations like Panzer Dragoon and Astal. It wasn't until it was announced that Sony had secured an exclusivity deal with Midway for the 32-bit version of Mortal Kombat 3 that I really began to pay attention. That deal brought the PlayStation a home version of Mortal Kombat 3 just a month after the console launched, and just 6 months after the arcade debuted. This was huge for fans like me and my friends. The better games in this episode were simply icing on the cake. The PlayStation had one of the most popular arcade fighting games almost from the very beginning of its Western existence, and that was no small thing. As you know, many more games would follow that would help solidify Sony's position as the system to own during the 5th generation. By the time it was all said and done, over 100 million hardware units were sold worldwide, and some 4,000 games were released. The success of the PlayStation was only the beginning for Sony, who has since gone on to sell over 500 million consoles of its PlayStation brand. It's hard to believe that's been 30 years ago now, and I hope I'm still around in another 30 to see where gaming has taken us. I'm Sega Lord X. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.